हमारे पूरे डेवलपमेंट मॉडल को 3 आधार पर डेवलप किया है। 1/3 एग्रीकल्चर, 1/3 इंडस्ट्री एंड 1/3 सर्विस सेक्टर।
किसान सबसे जरूरी है। अगर हम आगे बढ़ेंगे तो हम किसान के बल पे आगे बढ़ेंगे।
20 साल से यह देश एग्रीकल्चर ग्रोथ का टारगेट 4% तय करता है, लेकिन 2-2.5% पे आकर के लुढ़क जाता है।
Without investment, the growth cannot be propelled, and investments will come if farmers get good incentives, that is access to good markets, good prices. And for that the first thing is get the markets right.
किसान की जो कमाई होती है वो ज़्यादातर जो है बिचौलिए ही खा जाते हैं।
बिहार से आता हूँ और वहाँ जब बाढ़ आती है या सुखाड़ आती है, जो बर्बाद होता है, तो उसको लेकर के सरकार के पास कोई कॉन्क्रीट कोई भी उनके पास योजना नहीं है कि ऐसे किसानों को किस तरह से राहत दी जाए।
Empower the farmers into a farming community which is capable of taking up the trade part. It is capable of reducing the intermediaries and the gaps which is occurring in the value chain.
I think we have to learn how to use water. We have to get better technologies, whether from the domestic system or from anywhere else in the world. And then we have to get better pricing structure and good remuneration to the farmer.
फसल बीमा केवल इस आधार पर नहीं हो कि जमीन का किसी को जिसको मालिकाना हक है उसी को दिया जाए। अगर कोई बटाईदारी पर भी अगर कर रहा है तो उसको भी फसल बीमा के तहत उसको लाभ मिलना चाहिए।
We must ease infrastructure bottlenecks and rapidly modernize the supply chain from field to plate.
जहां कॉटन होगा वहीं धागा बनेगा, जहां धागा है वहीं कपड़ा बनेगा, जहां कपड़ा है वहीं रेडीमेड गारमेंट बनेगा, और वहीं से उसको दुनिया में एक्सपोर्ट करूंगा और मेरे किसान की इनकम बढ़ेगी।
Hello and welcome to Change India, an agenda for the next Prime Minister. Today in the 7th show of our series, we have 10 policy initiatives that will enable the next Prime Minister to transform India's stagnant agriculture sector. Agriculture employs more than 50% of India's workforce. These initiatives have been culled from recommendations made by a group of experts, and you can get all the details from our website thinkindia.in.com. Joining us in the studio are 3 of these distinguished contributors. We have Professor Yoginder, Alagh, one of the country's top agricultural economists who has also been a prominent policymaker. Ajay Veer Jakhar, Chairman of the Bharat Krishak Samaj, a non-partisan farmers forum. Nitin Puri, President, Food and Agriculture Strategy at Yes Bank. And with them is our very own Dheeraj Nair, CEO of Network 18's Think India Foundation, who has anchored this project for us. We also have an audience in the studio, among whom are some people who have actively pitched into the debate on Twitter and on our website. I would urge all of you to contribute to future editions on Twitter and our website, and we would be delighted to invite you to participate in the upcoming shows. Do note that we will present our suggestions on agriculture and 13 other policy areas to the next Prime Minister who takes office in June. So here are 3 points, the first 3 points for the Prime Minister, and these 3 points are all related to how to loosen the effect of quantitative controls on agriculture, whether in terms of prices or in terms of supply and distribution. So the point number 1 is, it's a fairly radical one. Sometimes policies in India become ritualistic. We are saying the minimum support price policy has now outlived its utility, abolish it, move instead to income support for poorer farmers who need that. Point number 2 is also about free markets. We are saying you must not have any more export bans. You must not ban futures markets, because sometimes the government, when it faces a crisis, moves quickly to ban exports or to put a ban on futures markets. We are saying please don't do that. Let both of these function normally. And point number 3 is about abolishing the Agricultural Produce Market Committees, the APMC Act. We'll come to point number 3 later, but I want to pick up points 1 and 2 with Professor Alagh.
I think what is happening in India is that we are moving away from an emphasis just on rice and wheat to a diversifying economy, which in other words means that support has to be not only in rice and wheat,
Right.
and not only in the favored region, favored crop, but it has to be, if you're growing at 8%, which you should grow, I mean this year you're not,
Right.
then if your income elasticity of demand is more than 1, which is true for milk, fruits, vegetables, demand is growing by 14-15%.
Poultry?
Yeah, poultry. Yes. Now, market support there is extremely important in the sense that the Kisan is moving over to where the demand is.
Right.
The big labor movement in the Kisan in the last census was to what is called census towns, which are basically smaller towns.
Right.
He's moving from villages to places where there is this demand. Now we have to support them there. 4 crore farmers have moved into markets in these small towns.
Right.
Earth satellite pictures show we have one of the greatest spread of these markets.
Right.
It's not the APMC.
Right.
That's where you
Right.
want to give support.
Right.
And that's the concept of income support.
Right.
It has to be much bigger than the MSP.
Right.
But Raghav, I would say don't knock the MSP until you got the other thing.
Until you've got the other. That's the point I was coming to you, Ajay. In terms of income support, it's very easily put on a piece of paper. It's very difficult to implement. What's required to get it done?
I'll just give you an example to put it into perspective. The agriculture production in the country has doubled in the last 20-30 years, but the number of agriculture mandis, market yards, has not increased at all. So we need to take the markets where the second green revolution is coming in, where new productions are coming in. And even in existing markets where they exist, the infrastructure is not good enough.
Right.
So we need to make all the infrastructure available where existing markets are, and we need to make new markets where they are.
Say when the next Prime Minister comes in and he accepts this plan, would we have a calibrated move where we pick up one or couple of states at a time, implement it there, bring income support, phase out MSP, move to other states? Is that the best way to do it?
I think minimum support price is a part of price policy.
Right.
And it will have to go simultaneously. I'm really not I'm not completely in favor of removing minimum support price.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in favor of giving incomes, changing the mindset of the farmer over a period of 5-10 years,
Right.
to understand,
Right.
and to be able to benefit from the price policy that we will come in.
Nitin, we haven't spoken too much about the export bans and the sort of frequent bans that we put on futures markets. We have suggested that instead of banning the futures market, which is really a price discovery mechanism, you must take it out of the current regulatory regime, put it under SEBI, so that it's really regulated as well as, say, our stock markets are. And in export bans, what we are saying is, don't ban exports. Let the farmer get the best price that he can anywhere in the world. But if you are falling short of a commodity, agricultural commodity in any year, ensure that you can import in time.
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that?
Sure. See, I think your second point is what I'll take first. This year we are going to be exporting 20 million tons of food grain, which perhaps we've never done in the history of Indian civilization. So that's a first, and how that has happened is because of a consistent policy of the government, wherein, if you remember, a couple of years back there used to be lots of flips and flops in terms of minimum export prices, restrictions on the quantities, when you could export, when you couldn't. But in the last 1 year, I think the government has done a phenomenal job of actually bringing about policy which is stable
Right.
and consistent, which has actually yielded results. And the end benefit in terms of the spin-off is actually going to come to the farmer.
Right.
So that's point number 1 on exports. Futures trading as a concept is something that enables you to do 2 things. It either helps you to discover price. So price discovery is what a futures exchange or a derivatives exchange or financial market helps you to do, which is not a bad thing. Number 2, the point that you were saying, that there have been times when people have perceived that futures markets actually result in inflation.
Right.
This happens primarily whenever there is an imperfection in the market. So
Right.
if you have less of participation,
Yes.
or you don't have proper regulation, but there are means like you could have a higher margin on your contracts, you could
Right.
have open position limits. So there are regulatory mechanisms which
Yeah.
can help you to subvert somebody to just take the market for a ride for a while.
Right.
And banning the marketplace is obviously not a solution.
Is obviously not a solution. Let me come to the audience. If you have any question at this stage for our panel, then please put up your hand. And yes.
Many a times in India, what we see the positive items of market like APMC were conceptualized to help farmer come to a place. get some facility, get their product auctioned, and then getting a good price. That was the positive point. Now what's happening is we are only talking about the negative point of APMCs. So sometimes the drawbacks become so important that why that concept came into the existence that we, you have many times we ignored that.
So there has been a distortion, you're saying, and therefore we need to need to preserve the positive points about the APMC.
True. So we need to see whether abolishing APMC Act 1 and then doing away with MSP will really work or not.
Okay, Dheeraj, the field is yours.
Well, Raghav, price and quantitative interventions have gone away from the rest of the economy, but they remain in agriculture. Now, the thing with MSP is, what's its objective? Its objective is to support farmers, to give them a good price, to give them a good livelihood. The problem is, nobody can object to that goal. We can't ignore our farmers. The question is of side effects. If you administer a medicine, it has side effects. You want to administer the medicine which has the least side effects. Now, MSP has two serious side effects. One, it only goes up. It never goes down, which has an impact on expectations and food inflation. We are really grappling with a serious food inflation problem. And second is it incentivizes farmers to produce what is under the MSP and not other things.
Right.
So if you have a guaranteed price for wheat or rice, why would you produce vegetables, for example?
Right.
And that's where the pressure on demand is.
And that's where the food inflation is,
That's
right?
where the food inflation is. So MSP, in terms of its aim, it's very noble. That's fine. Nobody can object to it. But it distorts the agricultural economy and it causes problems which we are really grappling with.
Right.
So an income support system, a system which doesn't distort the market but which gives the same income to the farmers, the support income to the farmers, is the way to go forward.
Is the way to go. Let me do a quick poll and then we'll take a break. How many of you are in support of the abolition of the MSP, the minimum support price, and allowing freer markets to work in the agriculture sector? Please put up your hand. Well, it is a grudging 40 to 50%. So I think there is still a large amount of acceptance for the fact that agriculture should be more of a protected sector, but there is a grudging acceptance. We need to take a break at this stage. You go into our website thinkindia.in.com, contribute your thoughts and stay right there and come back after this very short break. Welcome back to Change India, an agenda for the next Prime Minister. And today we are discussing how to get some fresh energy into our stagnant agriculture sector. We've already looked at 3 policy recommendations for the next Prime Minister. We are now on policy number 4. And this one has been very controversial. And in India, it's also been very stop-start. GM crops, genetically modified crops. Shouldn't we be adopting them on a much bigger scale? We've had success in BT cotton, which is not something that you eat. But should this also now be moved more aggressively in crops which you eat? For instance, GM brinjal, where there was a huge acceptance of it, but then the government has not allowed it to go on. Professor Alagh.
I think that this is something on which I have a very strong feeling. Whichever way you look at it, given our land scarcity, given the fact that we have what anybody calls 100 distressed districts water,
right.
The big source of growth is going to come from seed technology.
Right.
I said 10 years ago, did some little calculations which economists love to do, and I said a third of our growth will come from there. And it is seeds. And for each crop, Raghav, we need a master plan for seeds. Seeds is not something that you can wish today and get tomorrow. You know, if you take pulses, for example,
right.
You have to have at least a 7 or 8 year perspective. Why can't our yield in pulses be 2 to 2.5 quintals?
But that's the opponents use that very argument, saying that the seeds will become the monopoly of the multinational company or the company which has got the GM technology, and therefore the farmers will be exploited. That's the anti-argument.
Listen, the point is that even today a lot of our paddy is hybrid paddy.
Right.
The farmer buys the seed every year.
Right.
The answer there is to regulate it. I mean, you don't abolish futures because the market is thin. You regulate it, the point that
right.
was made.
Right.
Because it is one additional mechanism for the farmer to know what to do to store
yes.
or what crop to grow.
Right.
Now, there is no question that in the seed game, take pulses. Today, there are machines which can tell us within 3 years, we can get to the genetic core of the pulse.
Right.
and we can design a new pulse. That machine costs $1 billion. We can design a new pulse so that our yield is 2.5 quintals. 2.5 tons.
Right.
Today our best yield is 1.2 tons in Maharashtra.
Right.
So I mean, you know.
So you're saying this is something that there should be no debate.
Without that, you can't have an agricultural strategy.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's as bad as that.
Ajay, why is it that there is so much opposition to genetically modified crops? Why is it, for instance, that in the case of brinjal, everybody had cleared it, but then the government came and banned it? And we have a situation where the Prime Minister says that I'm against any prejudice, any unscientific prejudice, but yet his very cabinet does not allow it.
I think so. The whole government is pampering the urban middle class, and till the time, and it's a perception that's built by the media actually, and it has nothing to do with the farming community.
So the farmers support it, you say?
Farmers will support any sort of technology intervention, including GM crops.
Right.
But with GM crops, you also need strong regulation.
Sure.
And
sure.
I think so. We need strong regulation followed by lots of GM crops.
Right.
And that's the way going forward, but the government is not coming up with those regulations which will allow entry of crops or testing of those crops if they're safe for human consumption.
When we say it needs to be regulated, and when we say that you've got to protect the farmer from being exploited by monopoly seed providers, how do you do that?
See, as Dr. Alagh also said, even an open pollinated variety or a hybrid variety which came after the open pollinated one, hybrid variety is also something that a farmer anyway purchases,
right?
Isn't it? So that's going to be the same as far as GM is concerned.
Right.
But if you can have a system and a regulation which ensures the ethics are adhered to, which assures that on the social front,
should the government also come in and distribute seeds to farmers, the poorer farmers?
That could be one of the measures for.
Okay, I want to come to the audience and then I'll go to Dheeraj because this is a contentious point and requires a little bit of a complex summing up. How many of you would support GM crops? All right, so this time the audience has spoken and has spoken and has spoken strongly. The majority of the audience here, our panel certainly supports genetically modified crops. Ask your question. Yeah.
What if you promote organic farming that doesn't support BT crops and the money for it is higher, you get more money for it.
So let me get a quick answer
it's
from
quality or quantity that matters.
Can organic farming...
GM is a technology and organic is a practice, they're compatible with each other. You can use organic practices with GM crops, with GM seeds. So that they are compatible technologies. It's just because somebody in the US, the people in the US, they have come up with something, we are just following them.
Yes. No, I think to encourage organics is very important.
Very important.
There's no question about that. And in any case, there is a global market for organics. And it's a high value added market. The question is, should you, and you know, there is this point that Ajay makes. I mean, if you take SRI rice, that's an organic practice, but you can use high yielding varieties or you can even use BT seeds.
So there is no ideological incompatibility between organic farming and GM crops?
Not at all. And I don't think that's the issue.
Yeah.
The question really is, one is not sure whether only through organic practices without good seeds, we will be able to meet the needs of you guys. I'll be around, but...
Ajay, quick point and then I go to...
So one of the things that's not being discussed is climate change.
Right.
And we need to double production in 30 or 40 years.
Right.
But at the same time, the earth is warming and every degree gets production down by 10%.
Right.
And we need to get new technologies to counter what is happening.
That just makes the case for it.
Yes.
Quickly.
Ajay made a very important point about farmers' perception versus consumers or urban consumers' perceptions. And I think farmers, once they are shown a technology works, will embrace it. And I think that's the case with BT cotton. That would be the case with BT brinjal and other genetically modified crops. So I think the fear that farmers may not adopt it is overdone. Consumers, you can create all the fear you want, but we have to go by science in the end.
Right. And I come now to point number 4. Point number 5, and this one is extremely contentious as well. And it's been in the news. There's been a lot of debate around it. Is it good? Is it bad for India? And this is the Food Security Bill. Now, it can be no one's case that the poor should not get subsidized or even free food. It cannot be anybody's case. The argument against the food security bill is that do 70%, nearly 70% of the population need to get such subsidized food. And what happens is that when you promise subsidized wheat and rice on such a massive scale to 70% of India's population, then once again you are sending a distorted signal to the economy to overproduce rice and wheat and all the other things that people are now consuming, milk, vegetables, fruit, poultry. All of that stays in short supply, and then food inflation gets another spike up. That's the argument that people make against it, that please do subsidize the poor, but only the poor, which by all estimates could be only about 30%. So that's the debate. I've set it up for you, Professor Alagh.
See, this is a very contentious one, really. Now, the problem really is that if you don't cast your net wide, then the poorest guy gets left out.
Are we saying, sir, the reason for this bill, we are saying the coverage should be large because there are a lot of leakages and the poor are never reached. Therefore, the problem with implementation has led us to create such a wide spectrum law that we are, instead of fixing the problem, we are actually trying to find a solution and letting the problem fester.
No, I think if we are able to solve, I would do it experimentally. I would take up those areas where there are NGOs who are working with a good feeding program. I would make those as examples and then spread.
But you made a law, sir, which covers the whole population. So you're not going the pilot route. We now have a law which says that people like you people like me.
Raghav, you can't wait. India does have the grain. All the calculations have been done. With a little bit of pushing, it also has the money such that the poorest get. I mean, you can't wait. It is much too serious an issue. So my problem is that. That's why I'm suggesting that experimentally you move over so that you can, phase out the other thing. But I wouldn't.
But the law doesn't provide for that.
Now, what happens right now is that Mrs. Alagh will also get 3 kilos of grain.
Yes.
It'll have a market distorting effect. She's much too bright not to take that grain and make that money.
Right.
But, I still think that there is, if you don't cover big, you will get the poorest of the poor out. There are donkey studies which show that.
Right. Ajay.
I have a different take on this. Most of those who are poor, most of those who are hungry, most of those who suffer from malnutrition are farmers themselves, who are supposed to be actually growing the produce for the rest of the nation. Now, the amount of money that's being spent distributing cheap food could have been spent over a period of 10 years to make those small farmers self-sustainable by an income policy. And that's the crucial issue. I was in Ranchi 2 days ago, and I was with this farmer family in the hills, and he said that he only gets his PDS requirement for 4 months in a year.
Right.
So the whole idea is you make him self-sustaining. The debate is not about food security. The debate is about self-sustaining versus aid. And
that's reaching really the poor, so identification of the beneficiary, delivery to the beneficiary. Those were the arguments that should have been focused on according to us. Nitin.
Sure. I think I'll take from Ajay's argument on dole-outs will not last for long. So you obviously need to have mechanisms and systems which will be self-propelling in terms of increasing the income of the farmers, point number one. Point number two, the basic debate is obviously about ensuring food security, but what we are also missing out on is a number of inefficiencies, leakages, and systems and policies.
So now we have a law.
Yeah.
Now the next Prime Minister comes into office. What does he do? Because he's got a law to work with. This is going to be a very difficult law to change. Politically, it's virtually impossible. You can only work around the edges. What does he do?
Obviously, it may be irreversible, but it is possible for you to tamper with it in bits and pieces to ensure that, as Dr. Alagh said, so Mrs. Alagh would, not mind.
Yes, that's right. Why should the rich get the subsidy? I think, or rich
so
or the
from
well-off.
2/3 of the population.
Yes. Okay, I want to come because
So there's another point that nobody has discussed. We've changed the eating habits of the whole country by giving them rice and wheat.
Right.
Half the nation never ate rice and wheat.
Right.
And now because you're going to give them this, you destroyed the culture, you're destroying eating habits across India, across villages.
Because you're using a reasonably blunt instrument to handle a problem which requires very fine work.
What's your better instrument, young man?
So more millets, more millets in the whole program.
Broad-base the program to include other stuff and reduce the beneficiaries and
As you can see, as the audience can see, this is truly contentious. And Professor Alagh makes a good point that, listen, if you can't reach the poor, then at least ensure that your net is so wide that they still get benefits. The counter argument being that you are using a hammer to hit at a smaller problem.
Yeah, but Raghav, it's incredible how for 30 years, I mean, NTR started this free rice, subsidized rice way back in the 80s. So for 30 years, we're stuck in the same political economy of giving rice and wheat at ₹1 or ₹2 a kilo. I object to the fact that this is food security. I don't think this is food security, just giving rice and wheat subsidies. In 2014, we should be talking about a lot more. Obviously, the government cannot subsidize the whole thing. The question is whether so much, as Ajay said, whether so many resources should be pumped into this kind of scheme, which is going to leak, which is going to be siphoned off, which is not going to reach the poorest, as Professor Alagh agrees. So let us take this money, which is a large amount of money, and invest it in more productive ways. Let's get the output up. Let's invest in seed technology. Let's invest in irrigation and get the entire output up. Let's let farmers be better off. And let's get food security proper. Let people eat rice, wheat, vegetables, pulses, poultry, everything.
And cover the 30% with direct programs
cash,
like
as far as possible, direct cash transfer.
Right. Okay, one quick poll and then we'll go into a break. How many of you think the Food Security Act should be modified by the next Prime Minister, according to what the discussions have been here? Please raise your hand. Okay. So this is a young urban audience, and I think that was 100%. I don't think there was a single dissenter. So I think
I accept.
Mr. Prime Minister, this one is coming at you. There is a full house here which says that the new Food Security Act that has been passed by the government is in urgent need of amendment and repair. We will pass along our suggestions to you. We'll go into a break right now. You stay right there. Look at our website, thinkindia.in.com, give your suggestions, and come back after this very short break. Welcome back to Change India, an agenda for the next Prime Minister. And today we are discussing how to get the stagnant agriculture sector truly re-energized, reinvigorated. And we've spoken about 5 policy initiatives, and we've had a very contentious debate on a very contentious issue, the Food Security Bill, where the sense of the House was that it will have to be dramatically amended to cover only the poor. We now come to 4 points which are somewhat related. They are all about empowering the farmer, and they are also more implementation related. I'll come to point number 6, which says that each district of the country should have an agriculture extension officer, and the central government should provide resources for that. So this is an implementation point, hardly too much disagreement with that. Point 7, allow farmers to manage irrigation distribution projects, because farmers will be much more careful and efficient in using the water. So let them form a cooperative or any other entity to manage irrigation distribution projects. Along with that is the other point, that when you do mechanization, allow the farmer cooperative to make a decision on what to buy, rather than force individual farmers to buy too many machines, because the land holdings in India are so small that if you force him to buy machines, then he is likely to go into debt because he doesn't have the full ability to use those machines. And finally, we've got a point which says you've got to allow him to diversify, incentivize him to diversify into horticulture, poultry, fisheries and animal husbandry. We've suggested that a loan should be given to a farmer to invest in at least one animal. Each farmer should be able to specialize and invest in one animal. Sir, Professor Alagh.
No, these are very important issues. And the point is that there are success stories. We know there are planning commission studies which show that when farmers managed the lowest levels of irrigation systems, delivery efficiencies were higher than 65 to 70%, while in the other case they are less than 40%. And as we've been saying from the beginning, the food inflation problem is not rice and wheat. There's no trader who's going to take on a state which has got 65 million tons of grain, but it is in milk and so on. So full package, and there are states which have them. There are states which give you a loan to do a horticulture thing or a poultry. They give you technical advice. They help you in forming a producer's company, which is the new generation cooperatives, to market the thing. So I think, these kinds of things, plus of course seeing to it that You don't import simply because you want to keep your urban people happy. You have reasonable tariffs because the rest of the world is subsidizing 90% of the cost of its farmers. So you keep just a degree of tariff protection such that your farmer, the one who is globally competitive, the kind that Ajay is talking about, he or she is able to compete with world markets. Now this is the heart of the problem. And if we don't do it, we will be stuck with food inflation, also poverty. And you will keep on, you'll keep on talking about Manrega and giving free grain rather than people as a whole having the thing. This is very important.
Ajay, this bit about irrigation being managed by smaller farmers. Your sense, will farmers be able to do this efficiently? Are there models in the world which have allowed that to happen? If there are any pitfalls, what are those pitfalls that need to be
I wanted to say one small thing. In this, in big meetings that we have had, you just don't say this because the plan also says it. It says, the 12th plan says, Andhra Pradesh farmer managed irrigation systems is the model. But the models are one where you not only say do it, but you hand over the money from the PWD to these guys. Then you force them also, they will raise the rates. Once they have to manage it themselves, then the money...
So is it through a cooperative that you hand over?
Yes, you do, but the point is you make the laws such that they manage, so that the Babu and the politician can't take away those powers. You give them the money that you are spending, even if you give them 80% of the money, they'll manage it better. There are these studies. Sorry, Ajay.
I completely agree, and I say that farmers are capable of managing not only the irrigation networks, but even the country better than what we have today.
But Ajay, in terms
let me just, I have one point which is on agriculture extension. I think you need an extension officer, one officer for every 2 villages of the country, because that's the only way we can do input optimization and we can increase production. Now, one thing that's not normally talked about is mechanization, which is here, which is a very good point, is that the small farmer, when he buys a tractor, he buys a plow, he buys a seed drill, he doesn't use it for more than a marginal and a small farmer doesn't use it for more than 5 or 10 days in a year. And he pays interest to the banks for 365 days in a year. And as a farmers organization, no disrespect, we say that when a farmer buys machinery, it actually works for the bank.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you're going to use
that's exactly why we're saying don't allow individual farmers, because the small and marginal farmers are there, most of them, to buy machinery. Government should provide interest-free loan to cooperative societies to buy that machinery, and that's what income policy is. That's how income policy is.
So there are 2 points here where actually we are talking about empowering farmers' cooperatives. 1, managing irrigation projects. 2, making investments in mechanized equipment and other capital equipment.
That's right.
So these are practical, on the ground, doable. This will not. So what kind of size do you estimate a farmers' cooperative to be? An ideal size? How many? One in a district for food?
No, sir. We are talking about small cooperatives of 1 or 2 villages.
Oh,
we're not talking about huge cooperatives. And they're existing. It's already happening in the country, and you can see it. IFCO has supported a lot of these things, and it's working very successfully in many parts of the country. In fact, I borrow equipment from a cooperative in my village.
And there are lots of ingenious ways in which you can devise models where you can incentivize people to come into distribution of this and manage this on the ground.
So will Yes Bank take a pledge that it will not lend individually to farmers, but only to primary to farmers organizations?
Sure, we would be game for it. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is there's a lot more of appropriate technology that needs to be coming in terms of R&D, which makes things micro. So we need not borrow what's happening in the West, which is designed for 1,000-acre farms. But can we come up with things like a 5,000 rupee machine, which helps you till or do the weeding operation or whatever that's required? That is something that is again missing.
Okay. So let me turn to the audience. We are talking about farmers forming smaller organizations, smaller entities, and being allowed to manage a lot of their affairs. Will it work? Will this amount of decentralization work, in your opinion? Sir, you won the day on this one. Dheeraj.
Yeah, I think we have to get over this old mentality that the politician and the Babu knows best, sitting in a state capital or even at a district headquarters. I think we need to get over that mentality, and we need to devolve power. We've been talking about devolution throughout this series, and I think this is another important part of it. Devolve power to the farmers. They know what is best for them. They can manage their affairs.
If it's obvious to us, Dheeraj, why is it not obvious to the policymakers?
It's obvious to the policymakers as well, except they don't want to give up power. So that's why you need leadership at the top. I mean, if the Prime Minister or the central government is willing to give up its powers, then you'll set an example for others to give up.
The farm lobby is also not powerful enough. There was a second amendment to the Companies Bill, 2002, which said producer companies or farmers, which came from an Alagh committee.
Right.
In the new companies bill, they wanted to abolish it. And our chambers of commerce said that. Finally, people like me raised Cain, हमने जरा शोर और मचाया, कुछ JNU से लोग आए and cooperatives and all that from Irma.
But isn't that...
They put it as a kind of thing in the companies bill until we change it.
I'm digressing.
Actually, it should be the heart of the companies bill.
I'm digressing.
Producer companies.
I'm digressing a bit here. The largest number of politicians in our parliament come from the farming community. It is the largest political constituency in the country. Why is it not then a strong lobby?
Yeah, I think because you see they love to give doles, and cooperatives are not necessarily the guys who work the way the parties want.
So we are digressing there a bit, but I just want to understand. I want to come to the last point, and this one is on a national agricultural insurance regime which protects income for the farmer. Professor Alagh, it sounds like an idea which should have been done day before yesterday. If we can protect the incomes of businesses, of enterprises against fire, against theft, against terrorism, why can't we insure agriculture?
We can, but it shouldn't become a giveaway scheme. You see, the trouble with insurance is, agricultural insurance is that people, they don't distinguish between covering instability, which is weather induced or market induced or global market induced, with a dole. So eventually, you see, because insurance has to be actuarially driven.
Right.
And if you don't give the actuarial price, then the state has to say, I will give a subsidy.
Right.
I would say, by all means, smallest farmer.
So you're saying it shouldn't take the normal risk out, or risk and incentive out of doing farming. It should not become a dole, as you've said.
No, it should take it, but then the price has to be paid.
Right, exactly.
That is what is to be understood.
Right.
But what we normally talk about insurance in our country is कि हम प्रीमिया तो देंगे नहीं और तुम हमारी
जब खराब होता है तो हमें income
so that I think we have to be clear about that. Once you're clear about that,
right.
I think, but still that premium will be high because instability is there.
Yes,
then the state has to help the poor farmer.
This is exactly what we've suggested, that the state should come in and pick up a large chunk of that premium.
We are with you on that, absolutely.
I think so the government should pay 50% of the premium. They should say
50%.
whichever farmer pays a premium, we will add 50% to it. So you actually are not giving something free to the farmer, but you're hand-holding
So you're talking about a 50% subsidy is in effect.
No, it's not a subsidy. It's a premium that you're paying.
Yes.
And I think so the market is not there. Once the government starts giving 50% part of the premium, the market will develop for it. And I think so that's the way forward.
It's a new concept. I think people will take time to catch on to it. Until the time they are 100% into it, we've got to do what Dr. Alagh and Ajay is suggesting.
Dheeraj, wrap it up for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an unexceptional idea, and we have to avoid moral hazard of dole, because that is not the way we want to proceed. So 50-50, it's a good suggestion, Ajay's. Government as a co-pay, definitely doable. And I think it's worth the investment. I mean, instead of spending on doles, instead of spending on food security, spend on this.
Instead of really spending even on Manrega,
exactly.
Come in and put those resources behind something like this.
Exactly.
This is something the PM could do in the first
So I don't
budget.
think this is, again, I mean, the obvious point, we don't have the resources for this, but reallocate some of the resources.
Reallocate the resources. Okay, last poll from the audience. The panel is totally unanimous on this, that come in with a 50-50 scheme for national agricultural insurance. Yes? Yes, so this also. So we have a very supporting audience which is going along with a lot of our suggestions. We've got these 10 points. We will hand these over to the next Prime Minister when he takes or she takes office in June. Before we go, take a look at all our 10 points.